We'll do a brief description for the new people of what is energy healing, and then 3 minutes of silence, and then a prayer of gratitude. I like to do a little short prayer, kind of set the tone, kind of create that healing space for our session. And then we'll dive into tonight's topic, which is, it is finding and resolving the roots of suffering. Okay. And I said the seeds of suffering. And I realized as I was thinking about this webinar, those are slightly different things. So maybe we'll get into that a bit tonight. It would be good to clarify and define all the terms really clearly so everybody knows what we're all on the same page. Energy healing is using consciousness to heal the body or to heal any aspect of life, anything that requires healing. That could be your finances or your relationships or whatever it is. But using consciousness and leveraging the laws of nature of consciousness, that it's natural for consciousness, just like these waves on this ocean behind me, my diagram, to fold in on their own nature. They roll, right? The waves, they roll up to the shore because they're folding in on themselves like that as they're rolling toward the distance between the bottom of the ocean and the top of the water gets shorter, and it causes the waves to start to curl in on themselves. So consciousness does the same thing. I'm going to use this diagram for new people. This diagram back here, this background, this backdrop is here to help illustrate the nature of consciousness, that there's one great unbounded ocean of infinite eternal silence, which is the resource from where all the manifest field comes. So in this picture behind me, I'm using the ocean part of the picture as the great eternal ocean of consciousness, the source of creation. And I'm using the cloudy area up above, the sky area, to represent this material creation in which we live. And there's a bit of a landscape there. And I kind of like this one with the different colors in the sky, because they kind of help to show that there are different layers or strata, different dimensions, you could say, of the material world. And in energy healing, it's good to be kind of familiar with this landscape, because, or seascape as the case may be, because this is navigating this field is essential to doing effective energy healing. We need to know what we're working with. We're working with consciousness to heal the body. So we need to understand consciousness. Okay. So more will be unfolded as we go along on today's live webinar. Maybe we'll go back and forth between the steps of experience and understanding, and that'll help integrate and stabilize the information. All right. Thanks for being with me, everybody. Those of you who already heard me talk about that, and those of you who haven't. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is take 3 minutes of silence. And the reason for that is to kind of bring in the experiential level of this process that we're in tonight's webinar, that when we take 3 minutes of silence, what we do is we dive into, we allow awareness, it settles down into this subtler field, into the subjective field of creation. Oh, there we go. Now I've got with the seconds showing, so I can be very precise. I'm going to ask you to close the eyes. And after about 3 minutes, I'll ask you to open the eyes. And when we open the eyes, take a minute before fully popping the eyes open. Open the eyes slowly, because that way more of the experience of the subtle field of consciousness is able to integrate as the awareness comes back out to the surface. All right, let's close our eyes. All right. Let's slowly open the eyes. Take a minute. Thank you to the source of creation for being everything. Thank you to each one of you here in the webinar, each one of us in the webinar, and the whole universe surrounding us. Thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom that connects the absolute field of being with the whole manifest field of creation. Thank you for this hour that we have, an hour and 15 minutes or so we have together. And it's my sincere desire that we spend this time fruitfully, efficiently, successfully addressing tonight's topic, and also providing each one of you with the maximum value of this time. So this hour you walk away, my desire is you walk away going, oh, that was an hour really well spent. That's my desire. Mm. Thank you all. Okay. All right, I can close that. All right. Finding and resolving the roots of suffering. We're talking diagnosis here. And we've talked a lot in previous webinars about what do you do when you find the suffering. But now we're going to really unpack the way to get into the part of the suffering that is most important, or we could say even maybe use the word meaningful, regarding the application of energy healing techniques. We all have lots of energy healing techniques now, but if we're putting them in the wrong place, it doesn't do much good. So we can start by generalizing and saying, well, all suffering, some of you might have anticipated that I would say this, so I'm going to get this out of the way first, is generalizing and saying, well, all suffering basically is the byproduct of the fact that the one ocean of consciousness has to split itself apart in order to appear as many. And in that splitting process, this experience of separation occurs. And this experience of separation, or being not one, is not comfortable. So eventually what happens is the one enters into all the many, and then everything is back to happy. Everything comes back home, right? And one realizes, oh, I wasn't really separate all along. It was always part of the one, but I just didn't realize it. And we can say that's maybe that's the root or the seed of all suffering, but it's so generalized. And we all know from our experience that when we're doing energy healing, when you're doing energy healing, the symptoms have a huge, vast range of expression. You know, like one person has emotional issues because they had a rough childhood, and somebody else has cancer because they had a rough childhood, and someone else has, you know, lack of self-esteem because they had a rough childhood. And maybe each of those different rough childhoods were a little different from each other, and so forth. So there are details that will be helpful in this inquiry to support your ability to get in and define not just oh, it's separation is the problem. We need to bring the divine in because you guys already have that part of the story pretty well established by now, I would say. We need to look a little more, excuse me, a little more carefully at where in this spectrum, because down here in the source of creation is no trouble. That's no problem. That's the one. The one is fine. The one takes care of itself. It understands itself on its own foundation by its own nature. It's up in here in this area where the seeds and roots of suffering come in. So let's talk for a minute about the difference between a seed and a root. The root takes us back to the source of creation, and it takes us back into this junction between the unmanifest and manifest level of creation where the solution is applied. But the seed is really, even though I use the word root on my description here, it's in a way I feel after thinking about this topic over the last couple of weeks, it's more useful and more important to find the seeds of the suffering. Now, the seeds of the suffering will inevitably be connected to some karma because karma also shows up and appears as seeds. And we've done, I think, have we done a whole webinar on karma? If we haven't, we should. Yeah, we did a whole webinar on karma. So you can look back on the YouTube channel in case that one's been uploaded. And if it hasn't, then I suppose we shall upload it so that you guys can see it. But yeah, the karma already naturally sort of shows up in a seed-like form, but there's usually a point, there's usually an event or an occurrence or a moment when life shifts from, oh, I was going along and I was really healthy and fine to all of a sudden I wasn't fine. Sometimes it's a dynamic experience like a car accident or something very sudden, or sometimes it feels like it's a slow growing of some, deterioration that takes place. But somewhere it begins, And somewhere in the story of the soul, there is this point of inception. And I was looking deeply at the point of inception, and I, of course, ended up back at the point of inception of the universe. And from a Vedic perspective, this is represented by the form, the animated form Narayana. So I was looking at this word Narayana because this seed of the manifestation of the whole creation then should be found systemically in all aspects of the manifested universe. Na negates, but is the opposite of negation. So when we have na, we have negation falling back into the ocean of awe. We can think of the source of creation as represented in speech by the sound ah, full open mouth, open throat, ah. So negation falls into totality, na. And then it does it a lot, ra, because the R is like rolled. So the R represents the wave of consciousness that flips back and forth between the manifest level of creation and the unmanifest level of creation. So na becomes ra, which means it's negating over and over and over and over and over and over again, but negation coming home, right? Negation leading to wholeness again and again and again. Ya, na, ra, ya. Ya is E. It's actually the E sound with an after it, right? Ya. So E is the action energy. E is like the spark that catalyzes activity. And it leads back to na. It leads back to negation again. And it comes home with every stroke. Na, ra, ya, na. So it comes home each time. All right. It means that negation is both at the beginning and at the end of that process. But totality or wholeness is also at the beginning and the end. And it's also in the middle. But the laws of nature of this manifest field of creation, they favor negation. They favor separation. The creation, the universe, wouldn't exist if the laws of nature were slightly favoring wholeness, because if the laws of nature were favoring wholeness, then everything would be constantly resolved and completed and brought back to wholeness, and there wouldn't be the opportunity for the expression of diversity in creation. I hope that makes sense. So it is the laws of nature that circle around separation, and that circle around diversification, and that circle around the creation of imbalance, we could say imbalance, that are enough favored in this reality that we have a universe made of the 5 elements. Now is the time for a download. Feels like the download's coming into the heart, into the immune system, and into the throat. Download for the upper. So this will be the heart energy center area, right? And there's a feeling, the feeling of this download is one of kind of like a poignant letting go. So it's a purification. There's some purification associated with the download, kind of poignantly letting go of that, releasing or letting go. And it's hearkening, this feeling of releasing and letting go is hearkening back to very, very early childhood. And in very early childhood, what happens is that life is very simple. We're here in Arizona because we're just new grandparents. So I'm watching the unfoldment of human consciousness or intelligence from its inception. We were here at the time of the birth and then through just the first month so far. So I'm watching, and I'm watching how the intelligence unfolds. And what I see is that needs and wants and desires are very, very simple. They start as just an impulse of a feeling, like no judgment, not sure like what is the feeling. And that gives rise to, at some point, an outcry, which sends a message to mama that I need to be fed, basically. Or I need to be bounced. Sometimes I need to be bounced rather than fed. But that's about it. Bounced and fed. Like that's reality. That's an early reality. But for a baby, as soon as mama hears the cry, she's like, oh, yes, yes, I shall prepare and get ready to feed you. And it takes like maybe seconds or maybe a minute, like not very long. But for a baby, the whole physiology in the nervous system is so tender and it's so small, like it's actually literally small compared to ours, that those few minutes or those few moments can feel kind of like a long time sometimes, especially if mama has to go finish something or take something off the stove or whatever. Then that means, baby has to wait. And in that waiting time, the initial impulse of I have an unfulfilled need, it gets stronger as the seconds and the minutes pass. And so we could say that another way of looking at the seed of suffering is anytime there's the experience of an unfulfilled need. The unfulfilled need, of course, arises because nature is in the process of fulfilling the need. The impulse from the creation, from the source of creation, is I want to evolve. And so it starts to rise up in these waves of desire. And we've done other webinars that kind of go into unpacking that process, how the waves of desire become more and more intense before they manifest at the surface as fulfillment. But completely borrowed from the theories from the transcendental meditation. It's very precious information there. But that little piece of information, yes. But the point is that the fulfillment of the creator is found in how do we deal with the unfulfilled need. The fulfillment of the creator, I'm going to say that again because that's going to unpack. The fulfillment of the creator is manifested by the way we deal with the unfulfilled need, as yet unfulfilled need. That it sets up the desire being there but not yet fulfilled, sets up a condition that gives rise to awareness going more inward. Because when there's an unfulfilled need, that means the material level of creation is like a little less charming than it could be, right? Like when all the needs are fulfilled, we're like, yes, life is sweet, life is good, I got the ice cream, I'm okay, right? But then if the desire isn't fulfilled, then all of a sudden, oh, the situation or my environment, not so happy. And that causes the awareness to take a little inward dive toward the source of creation, where one draws upon resources that support growth. In the case of a newborn baby, like they have to learn to be patient. Like that's part of being human, is you learn to be patient. Another part of being human is, you learn to work around other people's schedules. Also, if you're dependent on others for something or anything, then you learn to accommodate, like, how do I work with that schedule? Like the baby feels the impulse come up, but babies who don't cry die, right? The baby has to cry, because if the baby doesn't cry, the mama doesn't know necessarily that the baby's needing that nourishment at that time. So there's that element of needing to reach out. How do I reach out? How do I reach out to the environment in such a way that my needs get fulfilled? The seed of desire, the seed of suffering. The seed of suffering comes from, I have an example for you. So this came up, I thought of somebody when I was just looking at this, like, where would I find an example or metaphor or story to go with how do you see the seed of desire or the seed of suffering is 45 years ago, maybe more, 50 years ago, so about 50 years ago, I was in 4th grade. And I was fairly insulated until I, came out into the school in this situation. And there was a child who was in school with me from 4th grade through 9th grade. And this child had a very different path through their educational process than the other kids. This other student, he never looked right. Like his clothes were always like really dirty and never fit his body correctly. And he looked like he hadn't washed in a long time. The hair was very like not looking good and not smelling, nothing smelled nice. And he was taunted and teased and put down by the other children. And as soon as I saw this student, I never interacted with him. One-on-one personally, never interacted with him, but I watched his shift going through. And at the time I didn't fully understand what I was seeing, but now I look back and I'm like, oh, I understand. The thing is that probably he was abused. I would fully expect that he was abused, and I hope he made it to adulthood, but who knows? Wishing him and everyone like him the very best, of course. That the way he responded to the other children exacerbated his problems. He self-sabotaged himself. He sabotaged himself. That I think, like, there was one time where I might have thought I was going to interact with him a little bit, like with compassion. I felt sorry for him. I wasn't going to tease and taunt him like the other kids, but I was like, what do you do for somebody like that, right? And what I realized is that his responses to the environmental cues, they weren't right. Every response he made, well, like if somebody was really a bully, it would all make him cry. And of course, bullies love that when you cry. Oh, when they make someone cry, it's the best. They'll do it again, 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 again to get that hit of that other person crying. But if someone like me, who's like compassionate, tried to approach him, his response was to like push that person away, and I don't want to have anything to do with you, and so forth. So it was, it was like it was a situation where it was like a devolving situation where the seed, we could say, well, the seed probably came in when he was like, maybe certainly had been suffering some kind of emotional abuse from an early age, but the suffering was also perpetuated by his response to environmental cues. And that came about as a byproduct of the fact that he hadn't completed his karma. Because when the karma is completed, then the idea comes, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. I don't need to respond that way. I'm bigger than that. I'm bigger than the bully. The bully can go find somebody else to bully or whatever. Or I can accept help from the environment, whatever's needed. Just going deep into this, where is the seed? Where is the seed? The seed can lie anywhere from here to up here. It can lie anywhere in the field of manifestation. But how do we find the seed? The way we find the seed is we take the symptom which shows up at the surface, or maybe it's an emotional symptom showing up here at the emotional level. And then using attention, focusing on that symptom, we follow it as deeply as we possibly can. Like, where's the deepest level of the seed? If you follow it all the way back to the source of creation, you find, oh, wholeness separated right there. There it is in the gap. Wholeness is separating and is creating this feeling of not being whole anymore. It's being apart. But in that, somewhere between that and the symptom, there's a key location, and it's almost always accessible through the astral level of the physiology. So you sweet people, remember, I'm opening, you remember this chart that's the same as the picture of the ocean, right? This is the picture of the ocean only in words. So you've got the physical material, and then etheric, which is almost physical, slightly less physical, mental, emotional, and then right there between 4 and 5, there's a gap between the present life and being constrained by the laws of space-time, and then the collective level of creation and being unrestrained. And it's the astral body level where we connect in with the rest of creation, including your karma. Our karma, we reach it through the astral level of physiology, past lives, ancestors, environmental influences. Sometimes the seed of imbalance is sitting in the collective. It could be, and here's the astral body, and it's actually part of the astral field of creation. And so, almost always there's some tie-ins with the larger world. Like what was I just saying? The boy that I went to school with, and then I was like, oh, well, God bless him, and God bless any children who are like, in fact, I think at one time I asked somebody, maybe a teacher or a counselor or somebody, about this kid. And as I recall, the answer that came back to me is, oh, well, there's always one kid like that in every class. Turns out there wasn't. I found classes where there weren't kids like that, but this poor kid, it was a little bit rougher for him than it was for others. But there are people, and all of us, I think one of the reasons this memory came up was I realized what I experienced was seeing a little bit something the same in me as him. There was some piece of it. It was like he represented a pattern of behavior that was in me just a little bit. I had it in some areas, in some isolated areas of my life. So the value of this, and let's see, is this the background again? Going back to the background. This is one of the ways, if you want to diagnose what is the seed, what is that critical point in the field of my consciousness? Where's that most important point where I put my attention to actually get in and do the most efficient healing? And what happens is if you ask the universe that, the universe will often bring cues from the environment, and it will bring, often it will bring people who are expressing or showing that particular area that you need to look at in yourself, but they're showing it more on the surface. Because when we're diagnosing, and especially when we're self-diagnosing, because when we're self-diagnosing, we're so close to the issue, right? It can be quite difficult sometimes to really get in and find what is the exact, where is that spot that I'm looking for? So, especially self-diagnosing, it's useful to ask the universe. And honestly, the universe is always talking to us, and whatever is up for consideration at the moment, that will usually be knocking at your door and trying to talk to you in some form or another. So part of the story is that I said, when you find this symptom, you want to follow the symptom down into the deeper levels. I realized that a part of the facility of doing that comes from refined perception and refinement of the nervous system. That means it'll be a little different for different people. For some people, it might be super easy. You look at the symptom, it's just like, oh yeah, there's a seed. I see it. It pops like that. And there's a saying that it's easier to see the lessons that other people have to learn than to see your own, right? So this is part of the story here, is that if we're putting ourselves in a position, we're creating that sacred healing space in ourselves so that we trust our own inner truth, then when the environment brings somebody that you can look at them and go, oh, I see what that person's problem is. Like when I saw that boy, I wasn't even really much of an energy healer as a child, but anyway, somewhat sensitive, at least compassionate. But when I saw that child, I could see that he was self-sabotaging. That was pretty obvious. So the issue of self-sabotage was up for me as well. But for me, it wasn't quite so on the surface. But then the example was there in my environment to help me, recognize. And there was some empathy. There was some identification, you could say a little bit, with his situation, because I knew that he really just wanted to be a normal kid like the other kids. He didn't want to be like that. He would have given anything to just be not self-sabotaging. So each one of us will be able to go from the symptom down to the seed of the suffering in a slightly different, to like different degrees. But one of the tools is to simply ask the creation, ask the universe. Because the universe is always talking to us, and it's always giving us cues. And some of the cues must be accepted as subjective cues. It's great if the universe brings you somebody who's quite difficult or whatever. And, it's not just that the other person's difficult, because you may or may not actually have the qualities that a difficult person who's in your environment has, but they will help to set up and create a condition that allows you to watch your response to their behavior. And it's your response to the behavior that tells you precisely what it is that's going on with you that needs to shift. Because our response to the behavior and conditions and situations and circumstances of other people, that response directly affects the formation of the nervous system. That's important. We're rewiring and reforming our nervous system, reshaping our nervous system every day, every moment, every second. We've talked about that before. 70% of the dendrites reform every day, just based on what we experience. And experiencing by looking at someone else doing something naughty or inappropriate or something is quite different from responding in a way that's damaging. The one response is to bring in the light of wholeness. When the light of wholeness comes in, to whether it's a positive experience or a negative experience, when the light of wholeness comes in to anchor that experience, then evolution results. And here I'd like to make a point, which I might have made at the last webinar, but I'd really like to make this point again. And I'd like to say to my team slash husband that, that this is something that could go up on YouTube because it's so important. And that is that we've been in the habit and this belief and thinking has been cultured by our society and by the world in which we live, that there's kind of like a light side and a dark side. They're like nice behaviors and habits and activities, and they're not so nice behaviors, activities, and so forth. And that when we get into the deeper, more subtle levels of creation, in like the heavenly realms or the abstract realms of creation, that's even more so, that you've got kind of like the angels and the ascended masters and the nice beings of light on one side, and then you've got the dark, criminal, like demonic energies on the other side, and that one is good and one is bad. And actually, that's not the case. Oh, I think we did talk about that last time regarding the way that compassion shows up to promote the healing process. That even the darkest feelings and emotions and impulses of intelligence, and when I say dark, I mean those that feel the most separated from the source of creation, but also we define as like anger and fear and revenge and remorse and depression and those, the more like deteriorating, they cause deterioration, that all of them come from the one source of creation and all of them return to the one source of creation. And all of them promote evolution when they're anchored into the source of creation. So as an example, I think I might have used that last time, fear and compassion together give rise to a response of protection. Anger and compassion together give rise to a response of taking action that helps solve problems, right? We get angry because something's not right. And then if we put that together with compassion, we come forward with an action step or words or whatever is required in the situation to help turn it into a solution to problems. So we treat the light and the dark the same. Our response to, oh, this is so lovely, or to, oh, this is so awful, the response is the same. Wholeness, we come back to wholeness. We say, yes, it's so lovely. And how does it anchor its way into the infinite field of absolute divine being? Because of course, anything lovely that anchors its way into absolute divine being, it starts to spread its light all systemically through the creation, because the source of creation, the home of totality, is infinite and unbounded. So it's nice, we bring it into that field of totality and it comes back nicer. The more destructive energies, they anchor into the source of creation, and when they return back out again, we perceive the solution. The solution comes because the ocean of consciousness of source of creation is a source of all the laws of nature and all the resources and all the energy and all the wisdom required to effectively work with those energies that are difficult in order to promote and produce a good effect. Okay. Back to the seed. How do we find the seed? Now I'm going to unpack This process having to do with the refinement of the nervous system and the refinement of perception, so that it becomes simpler to clearly identify what is the seed, what is the actual seed. So we start with a symptom. It may be a physical illness, or it may be some mental, some belief, or some understanding that's incorrect, misunderstanding, right? Or some emotional imbalance, whatever it is. When we look at the symptom and we like put attention on the symptom, we shine the light of attention on the symptom. And as the symptom starts to light up with the light of awareness, it starts to fit more, we start to understand the symptom more completely within the context of the whole creation, within the context of one's whole life, within the context of the whole immediate environment, within the context of the needs of the body, or the needs emotionally or fiscally, whatever the needs are. We understand not just the symptom, but what is it that I need? Like the baby, we're going back to this metaphor with the baby, right? Or analogy of the baby, is that the baby has a need. The baby doesn't know what its need is. The baby just feels something. It doesn't even know it has a stomach. It doesn't know its stomach is empty, but it just knows that something's going on somewhere in the ocean of experience around me that feels a little weird. And that's often how it is. When the symptom is there on the surface, it's like, I have a need that's not being fulfilled, basically. And I mean, ultimately, as I said before, we can go back to, well, that need is the need of one unbounded ocean of totality wanting to evolve and wanting to integrate perfectly into the field of manifest creation. But the individual story, the individual need, is like a little miniature version of that. So we need to kind of like, what we want to do is we want to break it down, and we want to see how the individual need, like the baby being hungry, for instance, fits into the bigger picture of one unbounded ocean of totality, creating the manifest field of creation and then entering into it. And of course, in the case of the baby, that manifests as being held close to mother's body, right? Because this whole field, the whole field from the unbounded through the whole manifest is mother. It's mother. It's the mother of creation. Oh yeah, happy Victory Day, everybody. Just a little aside, for those of you who celebrate Victory Day, that would be today. And that's a big victory of the mother of creation, the big victory of the mother of creation in the whole creation. So for the baby, the manifestation is like quite a good analogy of what's happening, is that there's a need, and then there's a response to the need of, and then the mother of creation, the mother who wants to support the healthy growth of the baby, comes forward and brings this experience of feeling close, of feeling intimate with the mother. And this is how the solution comes up. But we need to come back to the seed. We're still unpacking the seed here. So we have to see how this particular symptom sort of like fits in with the bigger picture of creation. With the baby, that's one way, but we're not babies anymore. And our needs are often much more complex and compelling and impactful. If you look at the suffering itself, the actual physiological imbalance, and you start to shine the light of awareness on it, that opens it up and it shows it within the context of a broader perspective. So the broader perspective has a sort of range, right? There's kind of like a more universal side of it. There's a more specific side of it. How does it relate to, you know, my physiology, or how does it relate to my family or whatever? So of this broader perspective, some of the broader perspective will orient more toward the surface, more toward separation, and some of the broad perspective will orient more toward unification or wholeness or totality. So you want to follow that, you want the thread of awareness has to follow from the symptom, and then the broader perspective, look at it like a sphere around the symptom, and where's the deeper level? Where's the more subtle value of that sphere? As subtle as you can get. Now we see a connection between the development of consciousness, the refinement of perception, the refinement of the nervous system, and the ability to get in and find exactly the seed. Because the more expanded awareness or consciousness is, the brighter the light shines upon the symptom, and the larger sphere it creates around the symptom. And the easier it is for awareness to navigate down to the deep, all the way down to the source of creation down here. And then from there, it's possible to scan from the symptoms. Say the symptoms up here in the physical body, it's physiological. And we can scan the whole range. There will be a spot in this manifest range of creation that lights up. That's how I experience it. There's a spot that lights up. When I say lights up, what I mean is all of it is waves. Okay, all of it is waves of expression. This ocean of consciousness rises forth, and all of a sudden I'm hearing the hum of the whole universe in my left ear. It's like, as soon as I said, it's like, the universe is like, yeah, waves. Anyway, sorry, I had to just recognize because it's so beautiful. And it rises up, and here we just need to talk about the nature of waves a little bit so that we can start to, and this is such powerful information. And it just came to me so recently in the last few days, and I am just delighted to share with you this information. There are two principles. One is that in this gap between the unmanifest ocean of consciousness and the manifest field of creation, there's a little oscillation that's going on right there, back and forth, back and forth. This is where the fountainhead of all knowledge and energy and experience is coming forward into the manifest field of creation. There's also a collapsing taking place. And so there's an expansion, collapsing, collapsing and expansion going like that. And it goes at infinite speed. It goes at infinite speed. Some of the waves are right there in the gap, like that. They're little waves. Some of the waves are bigger, a little bit bigger waves. And when the waves are bigger, that means that the range of their autonomous expression, the range of their effect, isn't just here in the gap where we don't see it. It's just like a little hum, like the hum that came in the background. It's like, well, it also is up here in the causal level. And so it also creates expressions. It creates those regions of the causal field that we use that are necessary to allow the manifestation of the laws of nature, the laws that give rise to the whole field of creation. But some waves come up higher like that. They come up into the astral level like that. So the waves have different magnitudes. Well, they also have different speeds. Of course, there's one wave that goes at infinite speed right at the point of inception between manifest and unmanifest. And there are waves that go at infinite speed that go at the whole range of the manifest field. So there's a wave that goes from the source of creation all the way up to physical material to this world that's like more than 50% earth element. Okay, so earth element is like kind of a heavier, slower structure, but they go from here to there at infinite speed. The reason we have this realm of creation that we live in is because the source of creation has figured out how to oscillate its resonant light, its frequency, from within its own nature all the way to this physical material level. And of course, because we have black holes that are even more dense than our world, it means it's figured out how to do it there too. So it doesn't just go to what we think of as the physical material realm. It goes all the way beyond that, to the infinite at the other end, to the infinite at the other end of creation. Infinite speed. But here's the thing, is that within this field, there are also waves that are slower. So there's infinitely fast waves, but then there's like not infinitely fast waves. And when the waves start slowing down, we start getting frequencies and pitches. We start getting waves that can be appreciated with our human nervous systems for their characteristics and qualities. Slower waves. And I was going to give you an example with my flute, because part of this understanding came up as a byproduct of a discussion about vibrato with my flute teacher. I'm so happy. I have this lovely flute teacher here in Phoenix. And we looked at different types of vibrato. She said, oh, play with vibrato. So what did Dorothy find? Vibrato has waves, have two axes. One is magnitude and one is speed. Infinitely fast to infinitely slow. There is, when you have a symptom on the surface, it means that the energy frequency in that part of your life or in that organ of your body is humming or vibrating at a speed that doesn't align with the rest of the field around it, like with the rest of the body, or it doesn't align with the blueprint and the wisdom of the evolution that's taking place at this moment in creation that's coming from the source of creation. It's not aligned, it's like out of harmony with it. It's out of harmony. So what that means is that when you have the symptom at the surface and you're digging down to see, but where's the seed? Where's the seed? There'll be a spot where the resonance doesn't, this is the way I experience, partly because I'm a musician, maybe the resonance doesn't sound right. It conflicts, it's out of harmony with the big picture, which is one wholeness trying to move into the creation. I'll give you some examples, just because I see we're coming to our 6:30 and there's some questions coming up and I want to answer everyone's questions. So playing with vibrato, I haven't played a peep today, so it's all not warmed up, but you can have a very fast light vibrato. It's like short magnitude and very fast. Very fast, it's not very heavy. Or you can have a really fast, heavy vibrato. Like that. Or you can have a very slow, heavy vibrato. It doesn't even sound musical, but it's important to be able to do it. Why am I doing it for you on my flute? Because, or the other one is the slow, light vibrato. Because as energy healers, what we're doing is I'm opening up this idea. I'm very excited to open up this idea, is that we learn to control the speed at which our awareness hums or vibrates. Awareness. It goes in cycles. Now, if you look at a sound wave or vibrato, it looks kind of like this. Like a sine wave, it looks like it's a wave going up and down. But if you take a sine wave and you turn it this way, it actually looks like this. It's actually a cycle. And so the cycles of creation are found within all these waves. So it's when the cycle returns that you count it. That's when you count it as being a complete cycle. And that's how you measure the speed of the resonation. that you're looking at. So when it returns is this. Oh, this is the side of unhappiness. Over here, I've got the unhappy side and the happy side. So you've got the symptom of something's not happy over here. What happens is we experience it and we compare it to the experience of wholeness or totality. And when it reemerges right there, just at that point of reemerging, it comes back. It started here, it came up here, it became unhappy. It comes home. Then it comes back out with the solution in hand. But there's a variance from one type of illness or one type of unpleasant experience to the next of how fast that cycle completes itself. Sometimes you will look at a cycle and the cycle is old. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say, was that like today I was doing some energy healing and I felt a wave of energy. This was in the remote healing session from today. Bless you and thank you, all of you who are in today's remote healing session. You'll get to read a little more about it and hear a little more about it. But this wave came up, and I swear it was this feeling that I remember specifically feeling back in like the late 1960s, maybe coming up on 1970, like 68, 69, right in there. This was this feeling, and it was just so palpable. It was so present with me at that moment. And so I just said, okay, you're a cycle. Here's a cycle that's, this is 1920. So, okay, here's a cycle that's, what would that be? 50 years? Am I a mathematician? No. 60 years? That's about 60 years, right? Because we're the 2020 and that was 1960. Let's say it was 1970. So 50 years. There's a 50-year cycle right there. So I said, okay, that's a cycle where the seed that's related to this thing that I'm looking at goes back for 50 years. So it's easy, you know, at that point you say, well, obviously I have to look for the source of the imbalance that I'm seeing now. I have to look back to 50 years prior. But then I went into this feeling because it was just such a rich, nuanced, yummy, like I hadn't felt that feeling in 50 years, right? So it was like, it's like a planetary return or something that carries a specific pull. It makes a specific type of pull on the body or pull on the awareness. And as I dug into it, I found that one of the reasons that this particular feeling was so compelling was that it had threads in it that went back way further, like back to ancient Greece, back to the time of maybe not even Greece, but back to the time of a lot of the ancient stone builder civilizations, where we have today these structures, you know, temples and stone structures that have survived because what they were experiencing, what the people were experiencing at that time was so compelling to them that they created something that lasted through the annals of time. It was very interesting. One of the big events for me during the time that this particular feeling came was the burning of a very important building on the university campus, where in the town that I lived, my father had an office in that building. And that building represented something. It was a very old building. And it was a beautiful, beautiful building. It was built at the time when people really took craftsmanship up to a high level, you know, and it's such a shame that it burned. But there was a relationship between this childhood experience of this building burning down that represented something great that had been built from the past, and the fact that there was this feeling inside the returning wave that also went to a much further in the past and allowed me to see how there's some waves that are really, really old. And so this is how, one of the ways you find the seed, or you look to the resonance that's behind an imbalance. You started with a symptom and then you kind of follow it back till you get to a level of experience. It's more like a level of waves. You experience awareness moving in wave forms in cycles, like that dipping into the source of creation, coming back out and dipping in. And how old is that wave? How long has that wave been waiting to return? If it's been waiting many, many centuries, it means that the imbalance that's being experienced at the surface is indicative of a seed that's very much on the collective level of creation. It's very much part of our culture and society and has been for maybe many, many centuries. So it means that we don't look to individuality to find the solution or to find the area that we need to address. We're looking to the collective field to find the area that we need to address. And of course, if a wave is like several centuries old, then it's a very slow wave, right? And we know, right? You know, you guys, you know this, you can do this. What we feel is there are feelings associated with different periods of time of history. Remember a couple webinars ago, I sent this lovely piece of writing from one of our webinar participants that was giving the words from a famous story of Beowulf that was written, I think, in the Middle Ages. I hope I got that right. In the Middle Ages in the England, I think, or maybe Germany. Maybe Beowulf was German. Anyway, sorry, I'm not actually a literature teacher, but anyway. But I sent this to you guys. The reason I sent it to you was that the words themselves, the way the consonants and the syllables form together, created a feeling of the essence of this quality that the collective consciousness was experiencing at that time. And it was so beautiful and it was so rich that I just wanted to share it with you. So when the wave returns, it tells you where the origins of that particular suffering began based in time and space. This is how we break it apart. This is how we break it apart. Okay, so some awesome questions have come in, and I haven't left myself tons of time to answer them all, but if I don't get to all of them today, I will get to the rest of them tomorrow. Thank you so much for sending in questions. I love you guys. All right, so where is the gap in the seamless wholeness of Brahman? In Brahman, it doesn't, the gap doesn't really, thank you, that's a great question. From my experience, I'm speaking from experience. I have a dear friend from Canada who really goes into so much detail with this. So I might pass the question over to him also and just see what kind of answer he gives us back, because he's more of an expert than I am, more of a Vedic scientist than I am. But my experience is when I turn awareness to Brahman, Brahman doesn't really experience a gap. Brahman experiences all of this as seamless. All of it is seamless. The material relative field of creation is already, because see, we, with our human nervous systems, we break it down into a sequential, linear sequence of experiences, right? So because of the linear nature of our analysis of reality through our human filters, through our human nervous system filters, we see differences. And we see, our senses of perception are designed to favor the differences. But Brahman understands all of Brahman only through Brahman's own condition. And so I know that probably didn't make a lot of sense to a lot of you. I'm kind of like trying to find words to describe something that cannot be described in words, but okay. But all of it is Brahman. All of it is Brahman. All of it is that one. Because from the perspective of the one, the process of appearing as many and then entering into the many isn't a process. It's all happening completely simultaneously in one great flow of self. So it doesn't experience the separation. But we experience the separation. And because we experience the separation, we are able to be the instruments for the integration process. We help it integrate. So we're part of that story. We're part of that big story. We're part of Brahman. Anyway, I hope that helps. Thanks. It's a great question. I love it. I love it. Okay. There's a movie out on the internet called Milton's Secret, which deals with awareness of the difficulties of someone in relation to the outer social mores and gaining a new perspective through more loving awareness. Oh, that's nice. That's nice. I like movies where there's like, good character development and it's actually something of substance and meaning actually happens. Not to say that, there's isn't something meaningful in all movies everywhere, but I guess we all like different movies differently, but that sounds like a great movie. Thanks. Waves of infinite frequency or infinite speed? Both. Thank you. This comes from a physicist. So thank you so much for being here and for putting this question in. So yeah, they go everywhere from infinite frequency to infinitely slow frequency, right? Like a single wave would be the lifetime of Mother Divine, right? And also to infinite, but you can have an infinitely slow wave that's also infinitely close to the gap, that's infinitely delicate, like the magnitude is also infinitely slow. So it's kind of like what I exampled for you on my flute, but as a human being, like I have to work more on that to be able to make my vibrato go to even quieter, even smaller waves and even bigger waves and even faster waves and even slower waves, right? So we're kind of working on from our individual level, how do I stretch my ability by cultivating my nervous system and by cultivating my consciousness, expanding my consciousness to be able to comprehend the whole thing, that whole range? It's a great question. So I hope that answered the question. Your question of the difference between frequency and speed, I think was the question between like the magnitude of the height of the wave. Because in my mind, isn't the frequency kind of the same? In music, it's the same. The frequency is the speed of the wave. Like if you have a concert A is 440 cycles per second, that's the speed, but that also determines the frequency. Oh, maybe with frequency. Okay, with frequency, you might be referring to waves within waves within waves, which we didn't get into today. I just talked about like single waves, but you see, you can have a sine wave that's like a really smooth wave. It goes like that. But most sounds that come out of most instruments or the human voice or pianos or violins or flutes or whatever, they don't look like that. Most frequencies that come out of a sine wave that comes out of a synthesizer is very, very smooth and it has a certain sound, right? But the sound that comes out of like, say, a double reed instrument that has a very whiny sound, like a wah, kind of a whiny sound, that is like a wave that goes like this. It has other little waves inside of it. And so maybe that's what you're talking about, frequency? Not sure. How compressed it is. How, there's another word for it. I have a friend who does like electronic music where they take the synthesizer sound and they manipulate it and change it. And there's a word, I think he calls it, does he call it broken? Do you remember what word? I'll have to ask him. Anyway, there's a way of taking the synthesizer sound that's really smooth like that and kind of breaking it apart and giving it little ripples and bumps and stuff and to get different qualities of sound. And you can really, really, really break it apart a lot. So if you break it apart enough, it becomes white noise. There's an answer in there somewhere. Thank you for the wonderful question. Okay. Not sure I understand what is beyond our material space. Is that a different dimension? Okay, that's a good question. Our material space is like all the different regions of the manifested creation have all five of the elements in them. So down here at the causal level of creation is mostly space element. And then as you're moving up, you get a little bit more balance of these 5 elements so that they become more the heavier elements are more proportionally present, and the space element a little bit less. And so when you come up to, excuse me, our physical material level of creation, this is also related to digestion. So some air is coming. It comes up to the physical material level, you get a little more, in this world, more earth energy, more earth element, more than 50% earth element. But our world is much more. It's much more than, like a black hole would be like way, way, way more earth element than this world that we live in, because our gravitational field of our earth and of our sun and our solar system is not so heavy as a black hole. In the black hole, all the earth elements are going to, all the heavier elements are going to come crushing in. Not sure what I understand. Not sure I understand what's beyond our material space. Is that a different dimension? The word dimension is used differently in physics than it is in like New Age circles, right? Like the Earth is moving into the 5th dimension or something. Like they're not talking about dimensions the way physicists talk about dimensions, right? So I think what I just described to you is like more of a physics type of description. And the way we think about dimensions in physics is actually usually dimensions of size. Is that not true? Like you've got like very small dimensions, as in measurements, right? Measurements, like the atom sits at a different dimension of measurement from like the cell or the solar system, like that. So, but thank you, because it is important that we get our definitions cleared up so we understand what we're talking about. Thank you. Beowulf is a hero from Celtic, British, Germanic cultures. We studied about him in British studies. Nice job. Good job studying about Beowulf. So we have more than one Beowulf fan in the audience. That's great. I'm happy to know it. And thanks for that clarification, everybody, for the clarifications. And thanks for being in on tonight's session. I know it was really, really a lot of more on this sort of abstract, not so much healing stuff. So maybe tomorrow's session we'll go into and see what types of energy healing we can accomplish as a group to help enhance everybody's ability to dig in and become more proficient in the process of finding the seed of an imbalance or the seed of suffering. All right, everybody, thank you for being with me. And sorry about the bait and switch. I said it was going to be the roots of suffering, and it was really more about the seeds of suffering. But I think it definitely, I used a different terminology, but I think I definitely aimed at my intention for this webinar. So as long as the intention is fulfilled, maybe that's good. Okay, thank you for being with me. Thank you. Thank you for your questions. Yeah, it's just great to be here with you guys. I'm looking forward to seeing you again tomorrow and going even more deeply into this topic and what we can do to help cultivate our nervous systems to become really good at handling all these theoretical aspects of consciousness and healing ourselves. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.